Hi guys, welcome to my channel and another animal watercolour painting. Today I'm going to be painting on hot press watercolour paper for a change and experimenting with a looser style of background. I'll be talking you through my thought processes and ideas for that, as well as discussing the ugly phase of art. I'm going to explain what I mean by this and how recognising it exists can help us in our art development. I really hope you enjoy the video, so let's get on with it. As usual, I begin by swatching out my paints using the reference photo to help. I'm going to be painting a cow today and picked out a fairly limited colour palette to work with, as you can see here. All the materials I'm using today will be listed in the description box below if you want to go and check them out. Now, if you've seen my last art chat video on how to avoid burnout, you'll know that I've been trying to schedule in some off-camera drawing time, and it was whilst doing this that I came up with the idea for this painting, as well as the topic for today's discussion. I wanted to try out a looser, more spontaneous background and liked the idea of creating a splash of colour using the colours I'd chosen to paint the animal with. I chose to paint a cow just because I've never painted one before and I love their big expressive eyes, so that's where I started on this painting. I mixed sepia and indigo together on my palette to create a dark blue-grey colour and used my fine Derwent water brush to apply a base layer, leaving the white of the paper for the highlights. Then I used the wet on dry technique to apply this same colour, only slightly more diluted, to the dark areas under the cow's eyes and on the eyelids. I used a clean damp brush to soften any harsh edges. Moving outwards from the eyes and for the cow's face, I then used the wet on wet technique and so pre-wet the paper with clean water before dropping in some sepia and some of that sepia indigo mix so the colours could blend together on the paper. I really like mixing colours on the paper like this and love the smooth result you get using hot press paper. I then continued in the same way until I'd applied a base layer of watercolour all over the cow's face before moving on to his head and nose. Working in layers from light initial layers and gradually building up to darker ones is how I like to work in watercolour. After all, watercolour is for the most part a transparent medium and benefits working in this way to fully appreciate its luminous qualities. I tend to see and to paint the piece as a whole rather than rendering any one part of the painting before moving on to the next. This allows me to make any adjustments to value or contrast as I go, just by adding more layers or glazes of colour over the top. This is just the way I work though. There will be other artists who like to build up layers over one area at a time, rendering as they go, but everyone's different and how you work might vary depending on the medium you're using, the style which you paint or draw in, and might even vary depending on the subject matter as well. But so what, you may ask? Well, the downside to working in layers like this is that often there is a time and a stage in your artwork where it looks, well, downright ugly. And this is what I wanted to talk about today, the ugly phase of art. This stage of your artwork can be make or break, and how you view it and deal with it can mean the difference between binning it and giving up because you don't like the way it's going, to recognise it for what it is, a phase, and pushing through it to complete your painting. Artwork may go through what you at least think is an ugly phase due to the nature of the medium you're using. Like I mentioned about layering with watercolour or even oils, for example. You might dislike a stage in your work because maybe you're new to the medium and aren't familiar with it, or you may have an idea in your head of how you wanted your piece to look and it's not going to plan or turning out as you imagined it. Maybe you're moving out of your comfort zone either by trying a new idea or a new paper, or even a new brand of paints, for example, all of which can affect your confidence as well as the way the medium goes down on your paper. So for me, the ugly phase of this piece was right about now, where I went out of my comfort zone and experimented with a new style of background on the hot press paper I don't normally use. And honestly, after I'd added these loose paint splats, I thought it looked a mess. And this was really frustrating. My original idea was that the simple and limited colour palette I was using would help to make the paint splats on the background look cohesive, and having them around the face of the cow would help to define the highlighted edges of the fur and around the ears. I was also aiming to soften the edges and blend them out to nothing using clean water, but I was left thinking my piece looked a bit, well, meh, and honestly I was ready to abandon it and start again. But whilst it was drying, I went off, made a cup of tea and had a break, and then I went back to it. I still didn't like the painting all that much, but I told myself to spend 30 minutes more on it before admitting defeat, and that's what I did. I began again by darkening up the eyes using a fine round brush and more concentrated paint. I kind of liked how they turned out, so I kept on going. Then I added another layer of paint to darken up the fur surrounding the eyes. And added some burnt sienna and a bit more detail to the area between the cow's eyes. I wasn't aiming for a hyper-realistic portrait with this one with individual fur detail, but I did look at the length and direction of the fur from the reference photo and tried to suggest this in my painting. Making sure that the length and direction of your brush strokes are right goes a long way to improving the realistic and natural look of an animal portrait. It also helps to give shape and form to the face or whatever it is you're painting. When it came to the nose, I wasn't too unhappy with the first layer I'd done, as I liked the way the bright white of the paper shone through, and I was keen to preserve that light bright look in the next layer as well. Instead of the indigo and sepia mix I'd used on the first layer though, I used neutral tint instead, and really liked how this laid down so dark in the darkest part of the nostrils. For the rest of the nose, I went back to using the wet in wet technique, pre-wetting the paper and dropping in neutral tint. Whilst the paper was still wet, I could drop in more paint into the darkest shadow areas and soften out the edges with a damp brush around either side of the nose where it was lighter. It was at this stage, when I'd done the nose, that I took another step back, had another cup of tea and realised that perhaps it wasn't too bad after all, so I carried on. I darkened up the inside of the cow's ear and pulled out some fur strokes into the white areas around the ear, and then repeated the process again on the other side. Then it was time to tackle that funny fringe on top of the cow's head. I didn't like how I'd painted the first layers here, as it just looked like a really bad haircut, but I did my best to rescue it by adding in darker values using my fine water brush again. I also extended some of this colour down the forehead to blend it in as well. By this point in the painting, I was actually starting to kind of like it, so I carried on some more, adding some details to the cow's horns. And that is the thing, that is the point. I didn't like it, I was ready to bin it, but after giving it a chance and a bit more time, I changed my mind. I mean, I still don't love it, but I feel a certain sense of satisfaction for not giving up on this crazy cow. And that is really what I wanted to say to you guys today. Art can go through an ugly phase, but it's okay. It's part of our art process sometimes. But you never know what can happen. Even if you persevere and you still don't like your piece, you will have learnt something. You may even feel inspired to develop your idea further in another painting. Who knows? I know not every painting can be rescued, but don't bin it. Park it for another day, a different mood, a more positive feeling or attitude. I mean, I finished a deer painting fairly recently that I started 2 years ago, and it was fun. So my tip for today is to recognise that paintings sometimes do go through an ugly phase, but have a break. Look at it with fresh eyes and maybe set yourself a time limit for another 30 minutes on it, like I did, and see what happens. The ugly phase could be a temporary one, so don't give up. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain, right? And recognise too that you are not the first, nor will you be the last person to ever have a painting go through this phase. It doesn't mean you're a bad artist, it's just a painting that's not finished yet. You can analyse what's wrong and come up with a game plan to change it if you like, or you can simply try again tomorrow after a good night's sleep. I don't think you can rush art, however frustrated, motivated or inspired you are. Maybe today just isn't the day. See it as a work in progress and give it a chance. I'd love to hear if you have any stories or experiences with the ugly phase of art and how you work through them, so drop a comment in the box below where we can share our thoughts. So far as this painting goes, I think adding in further layers and contrast helped it to look more alive and less flat. But once I kind of decided to keep working on it, I kind of viewed it a bit differently. Like anything that happened, good or bad, didn't really matter. It was an experiment, and that makes it fun. Either way, it takes the pressure off. Perhaps the key to working through this phase then is to either view everything as an experiment or just say to yourself it's a work in progress. Let me know what you think and what you think of this crazy cow experiment too. I do kind of like how the background turned out in the end, but I do think it would look better on a bigger piece of paper maybe, and I think I could have added a bit more of the neutral tint to perhaps the area above the cow's horns to balance it out a bit. So far as the cow's fringe, I'm still unsure on that bit. I did try to touch this up again at the end and added in more value and detail, but perhaps that's where adding in that splash of neutral tint there would help to soften things out a bit. But whether I like it or you like it, it was a fun experiment, and I hope you enjoyed the video and found it interesting or helpful in some way. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you did like it, and consider subscribing to my channel where I post videos twice a week on all things art related. Thank you all so much for watching, have a great weekend, drink lots of tea, take care, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!